Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, dear listeners, here's a little heads up about this particular episode. Unfortunately, we had some technical issues and we had to restart the call a couple of times. So if the audio seems clunky at some points, it's because I had to edit all the calls together. But fortunately, I was able to save all of the audio, so you're not going to miss out on anything. And with that said, I'll leave you to this extremely thought-provoking interview with Marcus Kain. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with fellow coach and podcast host as well, Marcus. Marcus, actually, I was going to ask you, is your surname actually Strong, or have I gotten that wrong?
No, my surname, really interesting story. The name that is attached to my social media channels and Strong Not Starving and everything is Marcus Kain, but my legal name is Marcus Murray. Marcus Kain came from my time in the music industry, and I was working in the fitness industry at the same time as I was doing music industry work, and a whole bunch of people just knew me as Marcus Kain, so I just kind of kept going with that. And then it just became too much of a hassle to change it back because it was established. So now I'm kind of stuck with it.
That makes sense. To be fair, Marcus Kain sounds pretty cool. Not that I dislike
you.
your other surname, but it's good to know which one to go with because I wasn't totally sure. Anyway, welcome to the podcast and thank you for joining.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for the invite.
Today, what I want to talk about, dear listeners, is body image, eating disorders, compulsive exercise. So I am going to tell you right now, because if you're listening and you're not in the right place to listen to this conversation yet, it would be best if you skipped this episode. And as for you, Marcus, the question I like to start my podcast with when I introduce a new guest so that the listeners can get to know them a little bit is the following. Who are you? What do you do? And why are you so awesome at it?
Well, that's a very kind question. My name's Marcus Kain. My job title essentially would be eating disorder informed nutrition coach. But I guess the subject that I do a lot of work around is the topic of resilience. So I do a lot of resilience coaching because every decision that we need to make in terms of change usually comes with a degree of discomfort. So developing the resilience and the fortitude to be able to make those decisions in line with our values and the life that we want rather than maybe the situation that we're in, it involves a bit of discomfort. So resilience is an important topic. So that's essentially who I am. As far as the awesome part of that, again, very kind of you. Anything that you've seen of mine that is half decent just comes from me being in this space for a very, very long time. It's only maybe in the last few years that I've got my head around creating social media content in a way that is a bit more digestible. The podcast has been going for a few years now, so a few more people are listening, but essentially I've been in the fitness and health and nutrition space since 2006, 2007. And I've just been paying a lot of attention, listening really closely, looking at where things are going wrong for people, looking at where my own journey went wrong and where I ran into troubles, and trying to answer difficult questions, all that kind of stuff, really.
What I'm curious to discuss today is particularly your journey because I believe that it's very much a journey of resilience. And what I would like to ask you first is how did your relationship with fitness, when as it pertains to both movement and nutrition, begin?
It started off with school sport. There was a lot of pressure in my household to do a particular school sport. Like the school that I went to in Australia, uh, rowing was regarded as this kind of really important thing that members of my family did and that was done at the school that I went to. So I kind of felt a lot of pressure to get into rowing and start doing that. So I did it, and then I was put in this kind of situation where I was in direct competition with a lot of other, people my age. I felt like I needed to prove myself. I felt like I, really needed to be the best, or I needed to be in one of the top crews. So I started training quite obsessively, and I just got it in my head that I needed to prove myself in a way, and that very quickly changed from being something that was about competitive sport and became all about body image. That was how the journey panned out. It very quickly became about appearance rather than competitive sport. The moment I started training and realizing that my body was changing and I got a few compliments around that, very quickly became all about appearance and trying to have the ideal body type.
Can I pause for a second? And when you say that your body changed, how did it change specifically, and what compliments did you get?
My body started getting leaner. I was doing a lot of, a lot of cardio, a lot of weight training. Obviously, the conditioning training for rowing as a sport is quite intense, and I hit that pretty hard. So I noticed that, I had visible abs for the first time in my life, and I just started to look more athletic. And ironically, someone who I'd tried to ask out on a date, like, a couple of years earlier, who'd turned me down at school, and it was very embarrassing, and I got teased a lot for that. They then turned around and started giving me some compliments and everything, so it was like a very kind of it was an interesting experience just to see how people started reacting to me differently when my body started to look different, and I was very quick to, at that age, I was about 14 at the time, start to think, "Okay, so this is what people want, huh? I can do this."
Yeah, understandable and relatable in my case as well.
Mm.
I was wondering, how was your relationship with nutrition at this time and growing up as well?
It was very dicey. Like, my mother struggled with what, in hindsight, I understand was orthorexia. So she was very restrictive and sometimes very controlling in regards to the food choices and the food choices that she would allow me to have as a child and the foods that she would allow in our house. Like, she had her own experiences with health and kind of health anxiety and going down the rabbit hole of orthorexia. So in my household, food was very restricted, not in terms of quantity, but in terms of variety. There were certain foods that were regarded as definitely bad, and you can never eat those. Things like chocolates and fast food and everything like that. So obviously, with those foods being put on this pedestal and being kind of banned in my household, naturally, as a child, I just wanted them more. Everything that I couldn't have, I just wanted even more, and it was made even more complicated by the fact that my mother was um, dealing with her own things and very busy in her own way, and so I would be rewarded with food sometimes. So when things like difficult situations happened, like things like when my parents separated, or whatever, like, all these kind of difficult things that sometimes happen in childhood, uh, my mum would then give me the certain foods that weren't typically allowed to try and help me to feel better and to maybe reward me in certain situations. And it's not a criticism of her. Like, she was doing her best and thought she was giving me healthy food as a kid, and she absolutely did. She was very dedicated to cooking lovely food and making sure that I was always well fed. But at the same time, some of these patterns around restricting certain foods and not allowing them in the house, and then conversely giving them to me as kind of like emotional support. And then when things didn't go so well, it created a contributed to a little bit of a pattern for me. So emotional eating very much became a thing from a very young age.
Understood. I'm wondering if, as a result of the variety of food being restricted, in addition to emotionally eating, you were engaging in behaviors like maybe overeating when you went to friends' houses or hiding food away. Can you speak on your experience about that?
Yes, really astute of you to mention, like 100%, like 100%. Whenever I would, as a child, like whenever I would go over to a friend's house and there would be all this food there that wasn't allowed in my house, even simple things like regular milk rather than soy milk. I would absolutely overeat and be quite obsessed with different foods when going to friends' houses and that kind of thing. Like as a kid, where all these things that I wasn't usually allowed at home would be there. Like even if they were, as simple as things like cow's milk or cereal or some chips or something like that. Yeah, that definitely played out when I was in different environments or, like you said, at friends' houses.
Yeah, that's very common as far as my experience when people talk about binge eating or emotional eating. I haven't had experience with that myself. I more so struggled, and to this day, to a certain extent, have remaining thoughts about around restrictive eating
Yeah.
because my background is with anorexia and orthorexia, but
Mhm.
that I wanted to delve a bit more deeply into that because I know it's so common, and I think some listeners will definitely it will definitely resonate with some listener. So then at this point, around 14 years old, you were starting to get abs, you were leaner, maybe leaner than you had been before, you were getting compliments. The situation with nutrition was also dicey, and you were exercising more so for the way your body looked. So were you still doing rowing, or did you include other types of exercise, rowing and cardio you've mentioned? Was there anything else you were doing?
The moment things became very much about appearance, I quit rowing. I quit all my school sports, got a gym membership, just started lifting weights and following that kind of bodybuilder type approach to training. So yeah, competitive sport didn't last when I became really fixated on my appearance. It very much became all about uh, a version of bodybuilding.
And would you say that you were isolating yourself to pursue this on your own, or did you have training partners at the time?
I very much isolated myself and did these things on my own. I've always been leaning towards the avoidant side of things, like personally, in a lot of ways, like bit more of a loner. Of course, I've got friends and everything like that. Like I don't isolate myself anymore. But at that time in my life, I was very fixated on my goals and what I thought I needed to do and who I thought I needed to be, what I thought I needed to look like. So I very much isolated myself. I would train alone. I would spend a lot of time alone. I would separate myself from a lot of the people who were just doing normal things that people that age do. Like if friends went to a restaurant or something like that, like sometimes I would go, but I'd be, you know, ordering a Diet Coke or something like that and just sitting there while all my friends kind of enjoyed themselves. So even though sometimes I wasn't totally alone, I was never really part of it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like when you got into bodybuilding, that was both a way of training and a way of eating. So I'm wondering, what did your training look like, and what about your diet? What kind of diet were you following, and what did you take inspiration from to come up with this training and nutritional approach?
So the training program looked very much like a regular bodybuilding split, like a upper body days, lower body days, split in different ways. Sometimes it would be, classic chest and triceps and shoulders like one day, then like back and biceps on the second day, and then lower body and legs on the third day, and then repeat. Other times it was split into more of a push-pull split. But then my diet went down a very, very low carb, like aggressively low carb direction, because someone, uh, when I was rowing, who was, a nutritionist at the time, who I was seeing when they started doing body composition tests on me, again, when I was 14, I didn't like some of the results. For one of the tests one day, I got very frustrated and I said, well, what do I need to do to keep losing body fat? Like all that kind of stuff. And they essentially recommended the keto diet to me. Again, I was way too young to be doing that diet. I was in a very, very bad place, and this person just didn't recognize it. They went right ahead and continued the body composition tests. They recommended a version of the keto diet. So I was very, very anxious around carbohydrates, like aggressively restricting carbohydrates and doing those kind of bodybuilder splits that I mentioned.
So your goal at this time was to continue to get leaner than you already were.
Yes. Yeah, leaner, more muscular. But because I was eating so little, and my expectations around what I should look like and how lean I should be and what that should look like, I was comparing myself to a lot of pictures of grown men who were using performance enhancing drugs. So I had no idea at that time of my life the way in which people use performance enhancing drugs, diet aggressively for photo shoots, get very, very dehydrated for fitness modeling photo shoots, and not to mention Photoshop and photo editing and everything like that. So I was comparing myself to all these pictures, dieting more and more and more aggressively, getting frustrated, thinking, why don't I look like that yet? Why don't I look like that yet? And whenever I looked in the mirror and didn't like what I saw, I would just make my diet more strict. I would further limit the range of foods that I was allowing myself to have. I would further limit the quantity of foods that I was allowing myself to have. And there was a period of time in my teenage years where what I was experiencing was very much anorexia. It escalated to the point of anorexia. Then in my 20s it became bulimia and then binge eating disorder, but it did it did descend into anorexia for a time.
Thank you for sharing that. My next question was actually going to be, when you were in this initial phase where you were on the keto diet, you were training so much in the gym, were you still emotionally eating at this time, or were you fully restricting?
There was a time when I was fully restricting, so there was no emotional eating for a period of time because I was completely down the rabbit hole. Like I'd fully committed to doing what I was doing on a level that was very, very destructive. But then when that broke, when I wasn't able to maintain that, it's like the floodgates opened. The same nutritionist who was doing the body composition tests and everything like that, when I kept losing weight and losing weight and losing weight, like he recommended a book which was written by a fitness model, again, another fitness model who's since been called out for deceptive or being deceptive about his use of performance enhancing drugs. I won't name the book because it's a well-known book, but I just don't want to go down that rabbit hole and cause that kind of problems. But this book introduced the idea of the cheat day. So it explicitly said, follow this diet and then once a week eat whatever you want. And of course, I was starving myself at that point in time. So that to me came like really good news. I was like, oh my God, really? Like I can eat whatever I want one day a week and I can still look like this guy. Wow, like that's incredible. So I started following this diet and this approach, which very quickly opened the door to a lot of emotional eating, because it's like once the floodgates were opened with that cheat day pattern, it very quickly became bulimia. My food choices became harder and harder to control, and it was just a mess, real mess.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So, what comes up for me that's interesting about what you said is that it sounds like you were aware, not aware, you felt the lack of nutrition. You were hungry. You experienced the hunger. I'm wondering, what did it feel like? Can you describe that kind of hunger that you feel when you are engaging in those behaviors, and what were you telling yourself to overcome that and push through?
During the period where I was just restricting and not in a binge and restrict,
Yes.
so in response. So in the period where I was just restricting, I don't have clear memories of the hunger. It's like I repressed it. And that's, the more I've understood about anorexia over the years and how dangerous that can be, and how difficult that can be, that being disconnected from hunger cues. So it was like during that period of time, mm, I was clearly losing weight very, very quickly, and I was clearly in a bad place, and emotionally I was struggling. It's like I was very, very irritable. I was quite angry a lot of the time. I was anxious all the time. I wasn't sleeping properly. I was very, very agitated. I couldn't concentrate. But it wasn't manifesting as like a visceral hunger a lot of the time, because that was just kind of being repressed. I was experiencing it as intense emotional dysregulation, intense fluctuations in my moods, energy levels. So, yeah, that it wasn't until I started trying to eat again that then I was really struggling with a lot of different hunger cues and some very strong hunger signals that were very difficult to manage.
Thank you for describing that. I brought it up only because the eating disorder I had started when I was around 15, so similar to
Mm,
your age. And I remember to this day what the hunger felt like.
yeah,
I suffered, I could feel that hunger. It was like there was a hole in my stomach, and it was painful. I was in
yeah.
pain. I could not sleep, or it was hard to fall asleep because of the hunger. And what's interesting in a morbid way is that I was happy to feel it, because if I felt it, I knew I was being successful.
Yeah, and I'm so sorry you experienced that, because it's so hard. Because when we start making that connection with, once we start feeling like that experience of hunger is a good sign, once we start connecting those two things together and start rewarding ourselves for feeling that way, it can be so complicated and such a hard cycle to break. So I'm I'm with you in that experience, and I'm sorry you went through that.
That's okay. Thank you for saying that. I actually remember the first time when I was going through my recovery and I felt full. And at first, I couldn't understand what that was. And
Yeah.
when I did, I started crying because I hadn't felt full in years. And I was like, so this is what it's like to eat a normal meal, like a normal person, and to feel satisfied.
Oh, it's incredible, isn't it? That we can be disconnected from that experience for so long. I think even though the period of really aggressive restriction with no compensatory behavior or binge eating or anything like that, even though that lasted like mm, a shorter amount of time in my teenage years, the period of bulimia that existed throughout pretty much my entire 20s, or at least until my late 20s, it just became so normal to never feel satisfied, and to be bouncing between, I'm either never satisfied or painfully overfull because I've experienced a binge. And it's literally not until my 30s, since being about 14 years old, that only in my 30s I started to experience what it is to be to feel satisfied in a pleasant way again.
Thank you for sharing that. I cannot relate what it's like to feeling overfull since I've never experienced binge eating, but it must be just as discouraging, and it must bring up just as much shame as as it did for me when I realized I had an eating disorder. I felt so ashamed of it for a really long time.
You felt ashamed?
Yes, because I felt that it was my fault that I developed it. And so I saw that I wanted to recover at that point, but I couldn't bring myself to actually enact the behaviors that would make me recover, namely eating more and exercising less. And so I continued to beat myself up for it. And every opportunity when I would see somebody else eat like what I perceived as a normal person, to me would bring up a lot of shame because I couldn't do the same.
That's a really, really rough place to be in when you kinda know what you wanna be doing and there is some awareness around it, but you feeling stuck in that cycle. Again, I'm so sorry. It's a really rough place to be.
I'm wondering, going back to your story, when you developed bulimia and binge eating, when was it that you first realized that you weren't in a good place? Because for a long time maybe you felt that you were simply pursuing your goals. You said you read
Yeah.
this book, and this book said, hey, if you want to achieve this physique, you can eat like this and have one day a week where you eat whatever. So you must have felt, wow, I'm following all the rules, this is great. So when did it first occur to you that maybe it wasn't so great?
Honestly, not until my 30s. I spent from age 14 through to about 29 or 30 thinking that what I was doing was just normal for someone in the fitness industry, for someone on this path, for someone who had quote goals around their body. I knew that it wasn't something that I had some awareness around eating disorders, and I knew that when I was trigger warning purging, like that, I knew that that wasn't good. But at the same time, I'd put myself in situations like the fitness industry, for example, where I was surrounded by a lot of people who normalized extremely disordered behaviors around eating. So, although I knew that I was kind of struggling a little bit, or quite a lot in hindsight, it really wasn't until I came out the other side of it and got more of an education on exactly what was going on that I realized, wow, okay, things actually got pretty bad. Because, when I was in my 20s, I was thinking about how bad things got when I was a teenager. And for that time where I was struggling with anorexia, thinking that, oh, at least like I'm not doing that anymore. I must be better. But that didn't like that a bit, yeah, it was only better by comparison, but at the same time it wasn't better because I was still doing something else that was very destructive in its own way, just a different pattern. So yeah, it honestly wasn't until my 30s, until hindsight, when I realized like, oh wow, okay.
That is a long time, but
Mm.
it's completely understandable, especially in the kind of environment that you're describing. I'm wondering, we've talked quite a bit about nutrition and your relationship with food at that time. I'm wondering, when if or when you couldn't work out, how would you react to that? And did it ever happen, or what did you put in place to prevent that from happening, if that really was a non-negotiable for you?
Oh man, I would panic if I couldn't work out. I would experience quite extreme anxiety if I wasn't able to work out. I remember I went away on a family holiday at one point when I was I forget what age, but I mustn't have been older than 18. I must have been younger than 18 still, because I remember I was there with my dad and it was like, family holiday type situation, and I packed a backpack full of dumbbells and weights and everything like that. And my dad went to pick up this backpack and went, Jesus, what have you put in here? And so I would go on, family holidays and take weights with me. Then when I was in my 20s, if I ever got sick or something like that and just physically wasn't able to get to the gym, it was just intense anxiety. But I would avoid not training at all costs. I would sometimes be quite sick. I would train through being sick. I would train through injuries and make injuries worse. Yeah. So in answer to your question, how did I deal with not training? I just kept training. I would need to be almost in a coma to not be training at that point in my life, which was not not helpful.
Yeah, completely understand. I went through a phase of compulsive exercise as well, and there was no circumstance under which my plan would not go ahead. So I
Yeah.
fully relate to what you're describing. So if it took you until you were on the other side of it to fully come to terms with what had happened to you, I'm wondering how were you able to recover?
It was a lot of trial and error. My recovery started with recognizing that binge eating was something that I was struggling with. I was like, why do I keep losing control around food? Like, why? Like, and I don't like to use the word control with food. Obviously, it's kind of problematic, but the whole process started with me going, okay, why? Like, this can't be normal. Like, why am I experiencing this level of difficulty with my food choices? Like, what is going on? So I just started reading and trying to understand more about binge eating disorder. Whether it was binge eating disorder I was struggling with at the time, or whether it was still bulimia, I don't know. It's shades of gray, like it's on a spectrum. But yeah, that was how it started. I just kind of realized like I did it in the name of still having body goals. Like I was still so invested in how my body looked, and I knew that those episodes of loss of control that I was experiencing with food weren't helping. So I was like, how do I stop this? So it was almost like it was a positive step that I took, even though the motivation behind it still wasn't quite about unconditional self-worth and self-care and all that kind of stuff. I was still very hard on myself in terms of body image, but in a way, I managed to take at least one positive step in trying to understand binge eating from that place.
So when did the intention change for you?
When I realized that I couldn't keep doing things the way that I was doing, I started to understand more about strength and conditioning, about sports psychology. I started to, I met the woman who would become my wife. I started to think, you know what, I wanna be present in a relationship. Like I wanna be able to go to dinner with this person and not be panicking about food. Like, I a few things like that all came together. So there was the motivation that came from just wanting to be able to participate in life, but then also the more I understood about how athletes train rather than how fitness models train, that was exceptionally helpful because it kind of met me on my level. I like training and nutrition and everything was still very important to me, but I realized like I can't do this in the way these fitness models are talking about anymore. This just doesn't work for me. So why don't we listen to some athletes, some professional athletes that are drug tested, that their career is tied up in performing well. That was a big part of the journey out for me.
Sounds like you changed the type of people that you surrounded yourself with. You changed your environment.
A little bit, yeah. I was still working in the commercial fitness industry, so I was still surrounded by a lot of the same people, but I started listening to different people.
That makes sense. And that was, it sounds like, when your recovery from compulsive exercise began as well. So it seems like it came a bit after the looking into nutrition more.
Yeah, very much. A really big life-changing moment that happened to me with exercise was when I started training with a few power lifters. I worked at a gym at one point that was owned by a power lifter in Kemptown, in just near Brighton in the UK, and I was following their training program and training with them. And there was this one day where I finished the training session for that day, and I felt like I could have done more. And I went and said to Tommy, the guy I was training with at the time, I'm like, Tommy, dude, like I I feel like I could do more. And he said, good, go home. Like, because we're gonna be training again tomorrow and the day after that. So you don't want to be absolutely shattered after every single training session. And that was like mind blowing, like moment for me. And I started to understand more about how, again, how elite athletes train, and how, if you're doing this kind of thing for a career, you you need to have variation in the intensity of your sessions, and you can't just show up and obliterate yourself every time you go into the gym. There needs to be a plan that takes into account recovery, both physical and mental. So again, the sports science side of things really kind of came to my rescue there when I understood it.
In a way, that was the same for me because I remember my mind blowing moment was when I discovered that with resistance training, you progressed workout to workout, or at least over time, the aim would be to progress because my main form of compulsive exercise was cardio.
Yeah.
And the way I was doing it, I would just go running for an
Yep.
hour, 3 to 4 times a week, because the goal was not to gain weight. I didn't care about my pace. I didn't care about getting better. It was, to me, it was always the same because the goal was keep your body weight at this level. And when I discovered lifting weights and I realized you're supposed to get stronger, you're supposed to do more over time, I was like, wait, there is a universe in which you do something that where you actually like you build something that was like mind blown. I was like, wait, what?
That's amazing. I'm so glad that that helped you as well.
And I'm so glad that you met Tommy. It sounds like he was quite
Yeah.
transformative for you.
Yeah, it's funny, like, that moment, training and working with him, that was a big moment for me.
And what about now? What is your relationship with nutrition now? And what is your relationship with exercise now?
I I went through a lot of years of just practicing intuitive eating, unconditional permission surrounding food, um, again, following a methodical strength training program that was structured, that factored in rest days and different intensities and different training volumes. So I kept training very consistently, lifting weights, doing all that kind of stuff, with just with an emphasis on intuitive eating. Like I just kind of set aside any very specific uh targets or whatever with food or body image or weight or appearance or whatever. I was just practicing intuitive eating and lifting weights to be strong. And after a time of doing that, like these days, I'm in a position where I've done a lot of work on myself, a lot of work on my relationship with food, body image, and training. And I'm in a place where I can safely explore some different avenues. Like I can safely experiment with a few different things and see, like, how do I feel when I do this, or how do I feel when I do that, with the understanding that I know there's a certain line with myself that I do not cross. Like, for example, I can experiment with, choosing some very nutritious foods and eating enough protein and all that kind of stuff, which wasn't always appropriate at different stages of the journey. But I draw a line with myself when it comes to anything that might affect participating in life with my wife, for example. Like, if a certain way that I might like to eat or things that I might like to try with training start interfering in me being able to spend time with my wife, go out to dinner with my wife, actually have that time and that connection, then whatever strategy that is, it's not for me if it interferes with that. So my priorities are very, very different. I'm at a point where I'm free to explore and experiment, and I keep my priorities in perspective while doing that.
Thank you, Marcus. I'm really glad that I could bring you onto the podcast to share your story. I think, particularly when it comes to these type of relationships, these dicey relationships with food and exercise, men are often less represented than women. And I think that the more we can open up the conversation and the more people we can involve, the more people that we can help, even with a platform like mine and a platform like yours as well. And since I want to be respectful of your time, we're going to sign off soon. But first, I want to give you the opportunity to tell the listeners how they can connect with you. And I'll then add all the links in the show notes.
Sure. Thank you so much for the invitation and the conversation today. I'd love to invite you over to my podcast for a chat and hear more about your story and just hear from you more because I've really enjoyed hanging out with you today. The best place to find me is Strong Not Starving Podcast. There is a new YouTube channel also called Strong Not Starving that I'm starting to release some videos on. But the main bulk of the content that you'll find from me is on the Strong Not Starving podcast, which you'll find on Apple and Spotify.
And dear listeners, I've been listening to the podcast for a long time now. The pun is not intended, but I'll allow it. I've been binge listening to it, and it's excellent content, Marcus.
Thank you
So
so much. Well, let's get you on for an episode. It'd be really nice to spend some more time together.
I would love that, and I've loved hanging out with you as well. And dear listeners, I've loved hanging out with you today too, and thank you for tuning in. And I will talk to you in the next episode. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.